crowd in Apple Valley watching this?
7 plus our 2 people. There's Mo's there to answer.
Oh, yeah. He asked a question in the registrant thing
Right,
that was
and
kind
I
of
already talked to Annabelle about it.
that's it. I'm gonna mention that we're gonna have another forum that
I'm
will
still
get into
with
some of
you. I
the
think I'm 4 and you're 3.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And then, so these can move down the mics whenever you need them, so.
Can we also talk to this guy?
Yeah, you should, I think it should move. Does it come out? Does
Or would
that
it
come
pick
out?
us up? Would it pick me up?
It's the kind of mic that
You wanna do a test? I think it's on. Hey, Jacob. So, do they take it out?
Yeah, take it out. Okay. Use it, and then you try to hang it down, or get it to the next person.
Okay. And I'll get to Q&As later. All right. I should be using a microphone. All right. Are we good? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. We have more than 100 people signed up for this discussion. A lot of people will also be on a live stream. We've got a watch party in Apple Valley and a watch party in Duluth that we know of. So what we're going to do here is for roughly an hour have a conversation about each individual's strengths of expertise. And then we're going to be opening it up for questions from the audience using this mic after we're done up here. We also will have some live stream comments, and then we've got some questions. We know who's here physically as opposed to who our live stream audience was, so she's going to try to make sure everybody is signed in there. Anything else an announcement-wise? Anybody think of anything? Okay. So hi, I'm Mickey Morissette. I'm the publisher and editor of Minnesota Women's Press. We've been covering the data center story since July. I had a summer intern writer, and we were doing our energy issue, and we said we know there's something to be said about data centers, but we don't really know what, and we don't know who. And I think she connected with somebody at Sierra Club, and then they pointed her to Kathy to the data center topic. We know that there's at least 12 cities around the state who are being impacted by plans. We're hoping to have the funding to do an extra print run so that we can make sure that people in all of those communities have education from this forum as well as other stories that we have in process. And then the other big hope from both tonight and the subsequent stories that we're doing is the legislative session picks up in mid-February, and we want to also make sure that people in the community know what their talking points might be, what they can talk to with their city leaders, and what they can talk to with their legislators, because we know this is going to be a topic again this year for any questions that you have there as well. So I have said enough already, so I'm going to just pass this down and allow everyone here to introduce themselves and what they do.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, for being here, and to those of you online. My name is Carrie Jennings. I am the Research and Policy Director at a nonprofit called Freshwater. You might know us for our calendars or our water steward program. And I am a geologist by training. I worked for 24 years with our state geological survey, producing geologic maps.
Hi, everyone. I am Carly Griffith. I am the Water Program Director at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. Protect our bedrock environmental laws and strengthen them where we need to.
Thank you, and I loved how you said that. My name's Annabelle Sanford. I am the Renewable Energy Business Lead at Emmons and Olivier Resources, EOR. We are in water resources engineering and environmental consulting firm based in St. Paul. Our company was founded on the idea that development and water can be stewarded from the very beginning and not as an afterthought just for permits. So we serve watershed clients, we do climate action planning, we help renewable energy developers, and in this data center space we are working with Freshwater Council in outlining how local decision makers can navigate this challenging data center and water use challenge.
Hi, I'm Kathy Johnson from Farmington, Minnesota. I chair the Coalition for Responsible Data Center Development, and it's a nonprofit organization of neighborhoods. We're just grassroots folks. We are fighting a major data center project that's proposed in Farmington to go right in the middle of 3 long-established residential neighborhoods. And we're hoping that our legislative efforts and our hopeful win will establish some parameters about data centers as they come into Minnesota, who manages those resources and so forth, and that it will be impact litigation, not just for Farmington, but really to impact the entire state.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Breeden. I'm the Government Relations and Policy Director at CURE, and CURE is a rurally based nonprofit. We work at the intersection of energy, environment, my time between the Public Utilities Commission and the legislature.
All right. So we're just going to kind of go down the line. So I'm going to start with Carrie. So Minnesota Women's Press has done a few stories about the water that we often take for granted and toxins that are introduced in the water supply. Tomorrow our photographer Sarah is going to be down in Elko to do a photo with somebody who is writing a story for our January issue about how the residential wells there have been impacted by a water bottling plant. And so when we were prepping for this conversation, use that one and you guys use that one? All right. So can you walk through how groundwater is distributed and what that means for access to people and businesses in different communities around the state?
Great question. Groundwater is just rain or snow or maybe a melted glacier that has entered the ground, traveled slowly to more permeable layers of either sediment or rock, and is stored there or moves very slowly through that layer. Groundwater supports all of our surface water features. If there is a river that runs year-round, it's supported by what they call base flow, groundwater emerging in the bottom of the stream. If there's a lake that's there all year-round, it's supported by tap into. Those water-bearing layers are like the rocks that we see here in the Twin Cities along the river valleys. They're sandstone and limestone layers primarily that are the ones that host the most water. These are deposits of ancient oceans. They aren't everywhere in Minnesota. In fact, they kind of peter out as you get west towards Mankato and as you get up into Chisago County. I don't even think of Anoka County as having water available in these layers. So think southeastern Minnesota, probably southeastern 19 or 20 counties. So I needed maps here tonight. I knew I wanted to point at maps, but the Twin Cities metropolitan area has pretty good access to this water, and then southeastern Minnesota. And if you think about where the population centers are, it's hard to get very far away from these extensive groundwater layers and find enough usable water for industry or largish towns or even big farm operations. If you're in the western part of the state, if you go up the Minnesota River Valley, you see the gneiss and the granite in the valley, you see quartzite and New Ulm. Up in the boundary waters, those rocks, those don't host large amounts of usable water. So what you're dealing with there is either you have to have a surface water source like a Great Lake or a big river, or maybe a smaller sand body that the glaciers deposited as they were retreating. So Anoka was settled mainly, that county was settled mainly as people drove little sandpoint wells into the surface, like 50 feet down or less. And so there's abundant water in those sands. Those layers are also more vulnerable. So quantity is very different across the state. Yesterday's rain, and in other cases, it's hard to imagine how long this water has been under there and what the land looked like when it first entered. So I think of it as kind of we have this mystery bank account underground. The total volume is really hard to calculate. The input Modern input is rain, and the modern output is the pump. Modern input is rain, and the modern output is the pumping and the discharge through natural springs and rivers.
And so because we're here to talk about the risks that come from data center development in particular, what is it that is at risk here?
So the risks are that we're extracting water faster than it's being recharged. And that will first appear locally, where you might get a local depression around the well that's pumping hard. And they call it a cone of depression because in 3 dimensions it's a cone-shaped hollow. I think of like getting one of those slushies from a Quick Trip or something, and it's blue, but then when you suck hard on that straw, it kind of you see the ice, it takes the blue color down. So we can dewater locally to the base of your trout stream. It might permanently lower a lake level. So those would be the first impacts. The longer term impacts, and then of course to the people area. And the study that I cited yesterday by Jim Berg,
Concerned about regulation. What kinds of gaps are you particularly concerned about?
State agencies, they're out there applying those regulations. But before you can even have a law, you need an understanding of where that water is. So you have to have robust groundwater science, which means you have to have good geology. And we do have those things in Minnesota, better than in the region, because of these 2 funding sources that have existed for 30 years, the sales tax and the lottery fund. Those monies have gone towards a really good understanding of where the water is, where the geology is. So we have the science. We have some really good legislation that documents who has the highest priority of use. It's you all. Domestic water users have the highest priority of use. The data center topic we have here before us tonight, they're 5th in line for the water that we have available. So there are 4 higher uses for the water according to statute. So we have good law, we have good science. Those science and law have been translated into that to the states. You're in charge of how much water you have. You figure out the laws around it. And most states don't think about it until there's a crisis. So each state in the region during a drought came up with a different system of how to regulate groundwater quantity. In our state, the Department of Natural Resources has primary authority over the wells that are permitted, and language that's their charge. The commissioner is only supposed to permit wells that are sustainable. But we've heard from the staff at the DNR that that's not a very actionable definition. It's not been translated into a day-to-day rule that a groundwater specialist can apply. And the way it usually plays out at the DNR is a groundwater specialist will look at a new well permit and say, will this interfere with any of the wells in the neighborhood? If not, we'll let it go ahead. The issue you cited earlier with the Elko New Market, the Niagara bottling plant in Elko New Market, is the first time the DNR also considered groundwater quality concerns that were related to the quantity of water that was being withdrawn. And this was a surprise to them. It was a surprise to anybody down there that once the wells were pumped hard in Elko New Market, within a 5-mile radius of that pumping center, people's domestic wells were impacted. Not necessarily, they didn't lose water, but black stuff came out. Testing and compensation by the city. None of this has really come to, it hasn't really played out that way. There's still residents that have concerns about their water quality, but.
So at MCEA, you're focused on protecting water from environmentally, basically.
Good, Mike. Well, first of all, I always love to be on events with Carrie because I love to see the landscape of Minnesota through the eyes of a glacial geologist. But I'm here to talk about, what regulations, what laws we have in place. And one thing that I want to, so there's 2, you asked what protections we have in place. There's 2 aspects of water regulation what these laws are intended to do and how they're intended to play out. But what we do at MCEA is we play a watchdog role to ensure that how these processes play out. Years ago in 1973, we passed the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA, which says that state and local units of government have to consider the environmental impacts of proposed projects that meet certain thresholds before any permits are secured. The governmental body that conducts the project, but it's usually a city or a state agency. So the purpose of environmental review as it's laid out in state law is to gather information about the potential impacts of a proposed project to environmental resources for three primary reasons. The first is to help governments make fully informed decisions before they start to greenlight a project. The second is to give the public access to decision makers project. So that's environmental review, that's how it's designed to work. Environmental review in itself is not an approval process like a permit. So the second body of water regulations that I want to discuss is our structure for water appropriation permit decisions in Minnesota, which, as Carrie said, is under the jurisdiction of the Department for Natural Resources. So under our water appropriation permit system, a water user who appropriates more than 10,000 gallons per day or 1 million gallons of water per year, you need to secure a permit from the DNR. It includes aquifer pump tests, which is when you test, you put the maximum proposed demand on the aquifer, you stress the aquifer to see how it impacts groundwater dependent ecosystems or other public water supply or private domestic wells. It's also intended to create transparency. So permit holders have to measure their monthly water use and they have to report their annual water use to the DNR. And then Carrie mentioned these briefly as well, but we also have these which say that in times of water shortage, the state must prioritize domestic water supply first. So this is how the laws are designed. But as I mentioned, we do have some concerns that some of these data center proposals have discussed about environmental review earlier. So we are concerned in our organization that the environmental review that has taken place for some of these data center proposals does not meet the intent of the law, because the environmental impacts, the full scale of environmental impacts, have not been transparent to the public. So I want to clarify what I mean by that a little bit more. So as I said earlier, environmental review in Minnesota is over 50 years old, but we also have an alternative form of environmental review that was created in the late 1980s. It was modified in 2009, and it's called the Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review, or A, proposed data center projects to shield the full scale of their environmental impacts from public scrutiny. So for that reason, we closely monitor AUARs when they're posted to the EQB newsletter, the Environmental Quality Board newsletter, and we have filed lawsuits. At this point, we have filed lawsuits to challenge AUARs that we feel inappropriately shield the environmental impacts of data center proposals across the state. So specifically in these AUARs, when there's what they call a large specific project that dominates the proposed development, the AUAR is supposed to include a detailed project description that examines the cumulative impact of, impacts to water resources, to the energy grid, to communities through noise and light pollution, that kind of thing. And we've challenged AUARs where the project description is inadequate because it's overly vague to the point where the majority of them never mention the words data center. So we're also concerned about the use of NDA, non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, between project proponents and elected officials in some of these cities to shield project information from the public. So I want to give you 2 examples here of AUARs that we've challenged aquifer. And it's not explicitly stated anywhere in the AUAR that the water would be to meet data center demand, despite clear records that it is for a project description. The public was not able to propose alternatives, which frustrates the purpose of environmental review. Where public resource decisions are made, a decision about how to proceed on a given proposal. MCEA's litigation is to ensure that environmental review meets the intent of the law. And then we feel it's up to Minnesotans to decide if we want to put a regulatory framework in place for data center growth at the state capitol, or for particular communities if a given proposal is right for them.
Great. One more question for you. We're going to be talking a little more, especially with Kathy and Sarah, about what community can do and support. But if you could walk through a little bit about what MCEA would love to see in the next legislative session, especially as it relates to data centers.
And so from our perspective, the biggest miss from the 2025 legislative session was the failure to require a mandatory EIS, which is that environmental impact statement that I managed for data centers. So that's our main priority. And we feel that because this is the most rigorous form of environmental review, it's the best way to analyze cumulative impacts on water, energy demand, et cetera. We also feel that there are other ways to improve. I know that you all have a particular interest in water demand at this event tonight, and we think that there's some other ways to improve transparency and accountability on data center water demand. So some ideas we have there include a separate permit would accomplish 3 primary things. It would require the data center to measure their monthly water use and report their annual use to the DNR. It would ensure that liability for any well interference falls on the industry rather than the city. You heard about an instance in Elko Newmarket where the city is on the line now for costs to deal with some of the water quality issues that have arisen in private wells rather than the bottled water plant. And it would also make those water allocation priorities that I mentioned earlier, which prioritize domestic water supply first, easier for cities to enforce. And then finally, in the interest of transparency, we're interested in a public comment period on water appropriation permits. They're one of the bills in our email newsletter, and there's a sign-up sheet in the back for that. Bills in our email newsletter, and there's a sign-up sheet in the back for that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, Annabelle, we talked recently and about the fact that, you know, one of the things, what EOR does is you, about the fact that, you know, one of the things, what EOR does is you work with engineers and you work with communities to figure out the best way. There's been places, I know Hermantown in particular recently, where they're not allowing public input. There's the non-disclosure agreements keep things kind of behind closed doors. So, so it is not yet clear sort of who's in charge of the public's need for water. And so can you just add anything about that you want to add about how this works and should work?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I'm going to go totally off script because you did such a good job covering the AUAR and EIS and EAW. So I'm going to go really off script. I think one of the things that the process doesn't start by looking up their regulations and looking up who's in charge of what. The process is going to start by stepping back and saying, how much does power cost over there? How much does power cost over there? What about over here? Okay, do they have any tax incentives? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they're looking at tax incentives first, right? And so they're looking at a market. They're looking at the US market. So they're not coming at it like, this is the regulatory path we could possibly take this way. It's cheap, but that you can connect. You can interconnect to the grid. And so this is where the energy side of things kind of comes in. When you have a user, let's say it's a data center, or maybe it's a small generation plant, like maybe it's a community solar garden, maybe it's a larger power plant, or maybe it's just like a giant residential development that's going to plug in. Like, they're going to look at what's called like the interconnection queue, which is where our grid operators and our utilities are doing all of these different studies to make sure that if you're going to plug in over there, and so they started doing these in batches and running batches of studies, and these studies take a lot of work. And if you're on the developer side, you get really frustrated. Really frustrated because you've got your application in, you're constantly asking, where am your application in, you're constantly asking, where am I in line, where am I in line, where am I in line? And you've got your utility side. It's really fascinating because when you put in, or a user that's going to either draw from the grid or it's going to add to the grid, you have to figure out where on the other side of the grid or nearby that power is going to have a problem. And that's over there in that other area where the infrastructure has to be built to help support it. So there are a lot of different pieces going into figuring out what order people are in on this grid or on this interconnection queue, and if they can plug in, and if so, when. And so a lot of times the answers are released in giant batches, and you're in these, like it's a really big deal. Like semiconductor factories, for example, those are high water users, and they need a lot of talent, and it's really hard to get the kind of talent that they need to go out into a non-urban area. And so they're considering all these different factors. By the time they get to the community, right, they've identified a landowner, maybe a couple landowners who are like interested in opening up their land for this development. By the time they get to the community, they maybe have like a pretty good idea of what the design's going to be, but they don't want to spend so much on it up front. Like they don't want to spend on business. That group's there to say, come here, we're looking for property tax revenue, we're looking for jobs, we're looking for infrastructure that can help our communities grow. This is why we're here. This is why that person that's going to, like maybe our mayor was elected because he promised this or she promised this. And so they have these conversations and they start them with the Economic Development Council, and then maybe a little bit with the power companies. Maybe they're not telling them exactly where the project's going to be. But that's when these NDAs start showing up. Is that what you're seeing? Yeah, so that's when the NDAs start showing up. And the NDAs, interesting because in part it's like they don't want everybody to know about it because there could be pushback. Yes, that is one of the pieces of it. But the main piece is, and I'm saying this as somebody who's worked for a data center developer and intentionally decided to come to EOR, it's a huge competition for that power. This is the market. This is the hand of the market at work. This is capitalism. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what this community would want if we come to this community. What will you be able to do that would, because we're looking at three. Can we figure out, are you going to lower the cost of power a little bit? Are you going to sponsor the soccer team? I mean, that's like a really frivolous example, but they're working out a deal, right? And that deal is oftentimes, it's just very private at that point. I'm not saying it should be, I'm just saying it's super private. And then at the conversations with the developer, once they've got this like, yeah, I think we're gonna go for it, and they move forward with paying the engineers, right? They move forward with paying the different designers to come up with a design that's designed to the company's standards. Maybe they have shareholders like Meta who are like, sustainability, what's your carbon footprint? You know, and they've got these internal design standards. Maybe they don't, but they're gonna ask the designers to come up with the design that's designed to the local restrictions and the local, the site constraints and the different pieces that all go into that. So that's where you have a lot of the engineering firms in Minnesota they're great at designing, and they are pulling together all these different pieces and designing to these standards. One of them might be, okay, we're gonna have this much water to work with, okay, and we've got this much power to work with. Okay, then, and we've got this budget, and we've got this goal over here, and you want it to be, in our agreement, we agreed that we'd also try to sell the heat back to the district heating, which is not actually how Minnesota works, but let's say they'll come up with different ways to make this project work. And they're consulting with the municipality, they're consulting with the local authority on what those are and who they should be talking to make sure that these designs are designed. Met Council is more of the regional, they're gonna do the regional water supply plans. The DNR is looking at the water use appropriations permits. Only until recently did they, looking at, you know, what are the different kinds of chemicals you're putting on. And then there's the local watershed districts, and there's all these before, or doesn't have doesn't have the staffing capacity to know exactly where it goes, or some of these questions haven't been asked before. It's really murky, it's really unclear, and it's something where even if your perspective is that they're like skirting the regulations, they still are trying to follow some of them too. And so it's like hard. It's hard. And so that piece of it, I think, is one that can highlight that, like, this is, who's in charge?
Yeah.
And because every moment that you're redesigning your site for all these different things, you're losing a lot of money as a developer.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one more question. I know one of the things we're going to do in the January issue also is Sweden has a data park that's quite sustainable. China has also been working on some of the green. Again, I know this isn't exactly your space, but what have you learned? And I know there's a lot of questions that we got from registrants that are interested in the design piece. So if you could briefly talk a little bit about, I know Virginia and Georgia have not gotten great design at this point. What can you share about what you're learning about
These solutions, like, oh my gosh, can we do that here? Or China's doing this subsea data centers to use the sea to cool it. And I'm like, well, that's a little interesting, but like, at least it's another option. And if you talk to a mechanical engineer who's designed data centers for 20 years before it became a big buzzword, and the developers and the, like, it's what are the different constraints? Because there is, so this isn't just different kinds of HVAC systems, really. And they're all different kinds and types of these cooling mechanisms. And if you go online, you'll find all these cool videos about them and all the different design. They've been like Tom Jackson, who's from Dunham Engineering, that Carrie and I have been working with on a white paper. He's also looked at aquifer cooling using the different equipment to basically circulate the water through these down into the aquifer, not exchanging the water, but just using the cool moving water of the aquifer to. It's not the ideas, it's what is the design process? What are the constraints placed on the design process? Whether that's internal, like their own sustainability standards, like the Rosemont data centers, LEED certified, closed loop, that's meta. They've figured out that people don't want anything less in the design of the site. And so when we do look to Europe or we look other places, those data centers are built in communities with district heat. That means that there are pipes going underground to every single building that are used to heat up the water in the building. But they need to be very clear. The design challenge needs to be very clear. And that is something that these levers that are different are standards statewide. Yeah.
Great. Kathy, I want to move to you. We've written a lot about the Coalition for Responsible Data Centers. There's a story in the current issue that's out there about Kathy and the work that she's been doing. We have a previous story that talks about why the Responsible Data Center Development Coalition was built. I want to jump ahead a little bit in our question because we've heard a lot about the sort of the science and policy that this expertise has, that you have been working on. What is your goal in these conversations with legislators? How have you learned how to do what you're doing to talk to legislators and city leaders and also lead a lawsuit?
Okay. I think we met in a park. We began as an absolute grassroots organization and kind of panicked and looked at all this before the citizenry even knows what's going on. By the time we do, it's like they've already reached third base and they're sprinting for home to get all the permitting completed before we're going, what's a data center? So what we have realized very soon is that oftentimes in Farmington, and maybe it's not always true, but to the legislature, I decided, and several members, because we weren't getting protection. The local governing unit was not working in our behalf. They were drinking the Kool-Aid from the lobbyists and the people that are selling them data centers. And we recognize that it's a template being used all over. If only you really as a representative of the coalition, I don't want to take all this credit, as a representative of the coalition, I don't want to take all this credit, but she said that the environmental lobbyists never could have gotten even the concessions that they did last year in HF 16 were it not for the voice of the ordinary people. My husband would accompany me to the legislature, and he said half the legislators were on their phones or not reading something else when one of the paid lobbyists was speaking. Maybe they already knew what they were going to say. But when an ordinary citizen sat there and told their story, I had their attention because they know whose vote it is that puts them in their seat. So my encouragement to you is do a little research. It makes a difference.
So you're also part of a group that is filing a lawsuit in Farmington because they went ahead and did all of this without getting public input. And what is it that what do you have to be prepared for in a lawsuit like that? And you might want to divulge everything that you're going to be talking about, but what is your position? What are you trying to do?
Okay, our position to prepare ourselves, we have to do two things. We have to do a lot of research. We have to know what we're talking about. And we have to do a lot of fundraising because we're just folks. We don't have a tax base. We're just ordinary grassroots people who've come together in defense of our community. Some of our situation is 50 to 80 foot tall buildings, 250 feet away from people's homes, 700 protected by our local branch, so we've got to file suit. We didn't think we had a choice. We're fighting predatory developers, and they are the ones who think they can call the shots for Minnesota. So what we're trying to do is stop that mentality. Our lawsuit is about Farmington. We have an orderly annexation agreement, which does give us a degree of control over land use, so we hope that's in our favor. But we also have some other, in the case of a drought, when the DNR says, okay, Farmington, you're going to have to curtail your water, it's up to Farmington to determine how they're going to do that. I have it in writing. Farmington has signed a contract. It's on hold because of the loss to get the water down there. So we're the Davids. We're facing the billionaires.
Brought a map that shows the scale
Right.
and what it really means, and then also on the website that we've done about this event and others created. And so anyway, there's a lot of different resources like that are out there, and I know that they brought a map, and it's quite stunning to see how expansive a hyperscale data center really is for a small community. So yes, I want to get Sarah's voice in here. With CURE, your tagline on the website is that CURE protects and restores resilient communities and landscapes by harnessing the power of people who care. So you're focused on rural life, climate, environment, and democracy. Data center seems to be a nice confluence of those issues. We had also, we have a story with Sarah that was in our August energy issue. And she also spoke at the Farmington forum that we did. And so we've had a few conversations with you on different things. There's a lot of rural communities that are being impacted by data centers. Are you trying, as an advocate, trying to convey to legislators, what did you try to do in the last session to protect what you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we were really trying to get across is that if Minnesota is going to have these hyperscale data centers being developed here, that it's really going to require very careful planning, and we just need to slow down a little bit. I think Minnesotans should be driving the discussion, not what we really saw at the legislature is that the paid lobbyists for all the data centers were showing we need to take a close look at what the consequences of this kind of development, good or bad, would be, and to understand that we don't know enough to confidently say that the laws we do have are going to adequately protect our water, land, and communities. I think I've heard a lot at the legislature even of legislators saying, well, these coming together and just saying, hey, what is it that is best for Minnesotans right now, is really what we were trying to get across.
I know there's a lot of environmental policy students that are listening tonight, both in Duluth and people from the Minneapolis campus. What advice can you share, especially as, again, we're looking forward to the next legislative session, about what bills you would like to see and how, again, regular people can voice this to give support?
Yeah, I think the language is what we're saying that they should consider it. So I think we need obviously much stronger language about just requiring, not necessarily a certain technology, because as Annabelle was explaining, there's lots of different options, but just recognizing that there needs to be some sort of requirement there. It's not enough to say, we thought about it. And then transparency. So obviously the NDAs is a big issue. I think it doesn't foster community trust. We're seeing that all over the state. So there's a question about should the folks who are signing NDAs then ultimately be the folks who are also giving the ultimate yes or no on a permit. That's, we're seeing that a lot in Hermantown, especially right now. And then communities, Kathy, you talked about all the problems that you're concerned with, sighting, light, noise. Is the system that we set up in 2011 for the sales tax exemptions for data centers, is that really applicable to the types of hyperscale data centers we're seeing right now? I'm not sure. I think that's an open question that will probably come up at the legislature. And then in terms of how can people get involved, I think Kathy did a great job. She, both at the legislature and right now, you were great. I think it's important to know that to try and connect with a legislator or a local, somebody from your local government on the issue that matters most to them. So data centers are unique in the way that they do cover a lot of ground. So somebody who might care about energy, you can focus on that, but maybe somebody is more concerned about water or privacy or AI being used for generally in the future. And then being really concise with your comments, getting to the point, and repeating them multiple times. People don't have great memories and they have really short attention spans, so just saying your same message quickly and over can help. And then keep showing up. It's really important that you show up. It doesn't matter who you are. These are your legislators, these are the folks in your local government. They are there to represent you. So you have absolutely right, and you should go and show up and share your concerns.
And ideally, these legislators have not signed NDAs, so there you go. So what I want to do now is, we've got several questions that were asked from registrants, and I kind of want to do them in a little bit of a lump sum. One of the things, Cure Minnesota has supported is supporting tonight's event and our January issue so that we can do a little more pages in the magazine than we might otherwise, which we're very, very grateful for at Minnesota Women's Press. And so some of the stuff that we can't get to today, we're also going to kind of create a Q&A so that we can, at least in the print magazine, have some of those solutions, some of those answers there. We also think we'll be doing another forum because there are a lot of things around energy and a variety of other things that are not really part of the thing tonight. So what I want to do for the next 10 to 15 minutes is just throw out a bunch of questions that came in a group from different people, and then have anybody that wants to respond do so. Then I would like people from the audience to ask questions, and then Dylan, do we have any live stream questions? Okay. So, named Alan said, I'm thinking people should be asking their township supervisors. And named Alan said, I'm thinking people should be asking their township supervisors and city councils to pass a resolution that they will not sign non-disclosure agreements without giving advance notice to the public 4 months in advance. Would this type of resolution be doable and enforceable? Another person, Emma, said, how can we make sure that data center growth isn't exacerbating water stress in regions that already face scarcity? And then somebody else, Ashley, said, how can we stop all data centers in Minnesota? I don't think there can be responsible development. So that's one group that's just kind of all about the prep, and then there's a couple other questions that are kind of related to design. So anybody that wants to jump in for any of that group?
I think if you want to know, I'll just be real brief. I think if you want to know where the data centers are coming and what status they have, nodatacenter.com takes you to our website. Farmington is the furthest along in the state of a developer-led. We also have, by the way, a Data Center Resist 101 toolkit that we can send out to communities that want to know what to do, because we do have a lot of people question, how do I get started? What can I do? And so we have developed that toolkit.
I'll add another resource. If you're interested, the rest of the country looks to this region as wet. And the Great Lakes region is kind of where their eyes are, partly because of the grid congestion Annabelle mentioned on the East Coast, Virginia, and also in Texas. So Midwest looks like it's not grid bound yet, and they think it is wet and cold. So really closely, and they're coming up with updates every 2 weeks on their website to find, and they've created these digestible PowerPoint slides so that you can kind of see, what state legislatures are doing, what the incentives are in the different states, and just kind of compare and contrast. For a long time, Minnesota had the most attractive incentives to bring data centers here, so that's why they showed up initially. And as far as the water scarcity question, the last question, we had the incentives, and our Department of Employment and Economic Development was also saying, come here, we'll help you figure out where to go. But they were, again, prioritizing grid, fiber optic, land prices, and communities that were open to this, and assuming water was available equally everywhere. So we're working with DEED and the state of Minnesota to try to nuance that message and say there's water in some places and there's no water in other places, and surface water is very sustainable. A Great Lake, a Great River, as if we have a water risk atlas underway. But I think that would help put the water intensive industries where there is water. There was a lot of questions that we didn't get to.
Every kilowatt has a water footprint. So when I say that there are waterless data centers that are, you can design them to be on site that are waterless. The Minnesota's grid mix is around 40% coal, for example. A thermal power plant requires energy without water. However, there are critical minerals in wind turbines and in photovoltaic cells. And so these footprints are along the entire path and upstream and down, and we really need to stand back and look at it. If you are interested in that energy side of things, fall into it. It's the most fascinating side of life I've ever fallen into, because it's all these systems, and a data center is part of a greater energy, not waterless, but not water intensive. And there's another side, which is our grid. Many of the systems that we point to in Europe have very intelligent electrical grids. They can moderate based on where the demand is. I use the analogy of it's like an orchestra where certain parts are quiet at certain times and they all know what's happening, and there's a conductor. Well, our grid is like an orchestra where nobody can see or hear each other. And they might not even be playing the same piece of music in front of them, and all they have is one sight line to one conductor who's waving their arms around. Now, I'm oversimplifying a very difficult, sophisticated than what we're doing now, and be very aware of the water demand that puts on our system. There's a smarter way to do this, and the way to get there is communicating with each other and communicating with industry. We have to understand how it works. Go sign up for their communications too, so you can understand the different designs, the different design standards, the different lingo that you're hearing, so that when you're in those conversations, this is just a more intelligent conversation. So I think we can do this. I'm very optimistic about it.
I'm going to throw in one more thing
that allow nuclear expansion and mothballed nuclear plants coming offline with new data center proposals. And there was a federal government request for a proposal for modular nuclear reactors that would power data centers at the Idaho National Lab. So the conversations we've been watching webinars, and It's certainly talked about just very casually that nuclear is where we need to go.
And they're referred to as small modular reactors. So the word nuclear itself, this is my applied linguistics background, which I never thought would come in handy. It's been dropped. The word nuclear has been dropped from a lot of the lingo, and that's
Were you going to mention
I
that?
was just going to say, just so we're clear, Minnesota does have a moratorium on new nuclear plants. So we have two in the state, Monticello and Prairie Island, and those are both operated by Xcel Energy. But yes, we have a moratorium on any new nuclear currently in the state.
And for good reason, those two power plants still have casks of nuclear waste. They're stored on site in liquid-cooled chambers, secure chambers, because we don't have a repository in the United States for nuclear waste. So each power plant is still holding on to their nuclear waste in hopes of someday transporting it to a place that can hold it until it's no longer radioactive.
But how they can be built, maybe a little bit more for that lay person. Sean wondered, what can we understand about closed loop cooling, harvesting waste heat, having a new rate class for data centers. Someone else asked, is the water possibly recycled by data centers? Does that work? Are people doing that? Somebody else talked about, how can we ensure that only clean energy is used, including backup power as batteries, not generators, and that the water use is a closed loop that does not impact our aquifers. How can we also make sure these costs are not imposed on the residents and other businesses? So anything
that, but we use it like this. And maybe that's through a regulation, but that is something we can do. It's where instead of using a continuous supply of water to cool the data center that is pulled in from whether it's a well or municipal supply to cool the data center equipment and then ejected down to the wastewater treatment facility, it would be filling up something like basically a closed radiator, kind of like your car, where it goes through systems that cool the equipment, and then it comes out, and then I'm not a mechanical engineer, you guys. Onset. The idea of waste heat is very cool. That is something that requires something else, right? This is a symbiotic thing. It will require like another building or a district heating area or system. And you can use that waste heat in that way. It requires a lot more engineering, and we can do it. The reason this happens in Northern Europe, create its own electricity and bring the energy efficiency of the data center. It's like up to 20 to 40% more efficient. And so there's just different ways to use it, but it does require different kinds of environments to design in, right? And so there needs to be an offtake, more or less, which is like how you talk about it in energy, but there needs to be something else where it could go to. I've even talked to developers who talk about using a building next to a car wash, actually, and using the water that they're pushing through for the car wash itself. And it's like, wait a second.
Water than the entire city of Farmington uses. And in order to, when you have a developer-led project, their perspective is they want to turn around and sell this, just like a developer of a housing development wants to sell houses, and they want to maximize their profit. And so they want every concession they can get from the small local governing units so that they can turn around and say, hey, look, I've got, and in the AUR, they are requesting this huge amount of water, and the city is guaranteeing it. It's like they are saying, we've solved all your problems. Meta in Rosemont was the end user negotiating with the city, and that was because they're competing against each other. And so that's why we really need the state to step in for regulations. And I will take this opportunity to say, please support our lawsuit, because our lawsuit can very easily affect it will be impact litigation that can help set precedent for the state of Minnesota if we prevail. These pamphlets are on the back table. Our QR codes for Venmo and GoFundMe are on there. We're folks without a tax base, and I'm asking you to consider supporting our lawsuit. Same with the people out there online. Obviously, you don't have the pamphlet. Go to our website, nodatacenter.com, and donate. All of our funds go to our legal fund. And thank
design standards, then we'll start seeing those innovations potentially. There was another thing. Oh, and a lot of this control does lie with the cities. So what we would like to see cities do proactively is say where you want to have your additional high volume water users. Say specifically how much water you have. Create a zoning district. Create some model language, ordinance language, but be proactive. Work with your neighboring communities, because it's not just you out there alone, it's you, all your neighbors are sharing the same wells. But if you can be out there and explicitly dedicating a certain amount of your resources, what should we be asking for? And so we're developing a template for those, a toolkit for those cities to work with that they want to share with the broader region. This is with the Humphrey School and the law expert at the law school.
I was going to just jump in real quick, only on the rate class question. So this year's legislation did include a requirement, so the IOU, so investor-owned utilities, so Excel, I can hear my colleague from Duluth yelling at me that I can't recall all the other ones, but the investor-owned utilities, not your munis, not your rural electric co-ops, they are required by law now to create that kind of new rate class for very large users.
Badass membership, trying to get funding so that we can send magazines to these 12 communities currently that are being impacted. So I do know that we're going to have at least one more conversation, but that will focus on, for one, Mo, who's connected with the coalition, had a really long, in-depth thing about energy use, and I actually want him to help contribute to one of the stories that we want to do, because he's an engineer, he knows a lot, and I didn't even understand his question. It goes into such detail. So anyway, there are a lot of things that, tonight we're kind of focused on the water impact, but there's other aspects that we've been touching on. So anyone in the room want to...
About the solutions, about closed loop systems, and they all sound great, but we're not doing them. Can you speak to the why of, I fear it's money, but can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, so that's in part, these systems, a private developer is going to come in and they're going to design for the lowest possible operating cost if they're an operator, right? And well hitting the required design requirements, right? And those requirements are set by environmental policy. They can be set internally by the data center, which you fairly said maybe we don't want to rely on that for our entire state, waterless in that way. And those are different factors. That's not all engineering firms are going to say, okay, that's the list, that's all we're going to do. They're going to offer some different design ideas. Some engineers may even say, wow, like I know at EOR we've done this on certain builds, and we have not built for a data center. We determined not to do that until we meet somebody who is interested in designing to a very high waterless standard. But we've suggested, for example, if a solar client comes to us and says, we don't want to do these intent basins that capture the raindrop that go into the ground. We want to put weepers on site and send all the water off. Well, that's like why our company was founded, was the idea of green infrastructure. So you might have some people or firms that are going to say, no, we have a high standard and this is what we're going to do. And maybe this isn't going to work out. But that's not a regulatory standard, right? That's set internally by either the companies that they're going to work with or not, or themselves by their shareholders. And so just think of them like different levers that you can pull. And so when we're talking about the environmental impact statement and the environmental assessment process, the AUAR that we're talking about, that is like a worksheet that was designed for like an office building on an area that they're like, okay, this is generally like, this is good for development. When you come in, get all of it. It's going to look at what is it doing now? And then if there's no build at all, what is it going to do? All these different pieces, and it's going to require thorough analysis. EOR is one of the firms that's hired to do that for contentious mining in northern Minnesota. We have to review everything that is submitted to the state and make sure that their review is held to account. I mean, it's a very intense process, and it's public. The other piece of this is, well, I'll let Carrie go because I think I know where you're going with it.
You do? Okay. Yeah, I was going to go back to when Annabelle was reading out of her notebook about all the different agency authorities. Roof of a building and falls off onto the ground now has potential pollutants. So the Pollution Control Agency has to get engaged in that. They're engaged in stormwater permits. If that sits in a pond for a while, that's like a lake, and the DNR regulates lakes. So the DNR has to get involved in permitting the reuse of water from a lake, because it's a water of the state now. If you irrigate a ball field with that water, it's potentially going to touch a human being, and the Department of Health is concerned about your health, and they don't want you to get Legionella or some other waterborne illness, so they come into play with permits to reuse water, have to go through all those separate agencies on their timelines, and it's just a challenge to even figure out what the process is. And as Annabelle pointed out, there might also be local watershed constraints for these waters as well. So what we need is kind of a succinct, clear pathway for water to be reused. And we don't even have the ability to inject water deeper into the ground. There are concerns over introducing contaminants by the Department of Health, but we don't even have the authority from the federal government to start putting water back into the deep groundwater.
I have one more quick question for everybody, but I want to, again, if there's anybody in the room that wants to ask something.
But my first question is for you, Carrie. I was just a general question about groundwater and permeability. You mentioned that, and I've heard about this for a long time, how these aquifers are... Could you get closer to the mic? Sorry. I've heard for a long time about how aquifers will sink when they're depleted. Does that permeability, when you lose it, is it gone for good? Like, does that stuff actually collapse and you can't blow it back up again like a sponge?
That's a good question. And there are places like in the Central Valley of California where the silt and the sand, that if you withdraw the water, then that pore spaces, those collapse and you get subsidence, and that's seen in some areas. We don't think that's an issue here, and I in particular don't think it is, because I've done a lot of drilling through the glacial sediment to the bedrock, and we were under the weight of glaciers. Glaciers really compressed the land significantly. Most of the glacial sediment is over-consolidated, and when I would drill through it and vibrate it, it would expand, sometimes 50% of its volume. So I think we're over-consolidated, and subsidence is not going to be a concern, except for the most recent sediments that haven't been compressed by the weight of ice.
Gotcha. Is it cool if I ask one more too? And this is just, maybe it's a more general question, but I think it's just something that really, I mean, Farmington's a perfect example. How is it that these people, that the city council or people in the local government so easily capitulate? They just say yes. Is it truly just a complete lack of understanding? Are they dealing with a giant who, because they know this playbook so well, that they can basically make promises that are, I mean, I've heard cases of the soccer team where we're going to give you a one-time break for schools, but is a data center going to provide 100 years worth of economic benefit or anything for the local residents of the city?
I think that's what the local governing unit thinks is true. And I used to think that was true too, until I did a lot of reading about the reality of other places. When I go to the legislature, I've always said, we're in the infancy of this. Look at other places that have had data centers. And the two big things that are promised are property taxes and jobs. And the jobs piece is well supported in research that long-term permanent jobs after build-up are very rare. The high-tech ones are remote. We don't even know if they'll be done in this country. Of course, there's construction jobs during the building period, but even some of those are done by crews that chase data center developments all over the country. They're not necessarily local. As far as property tax, I can't say there's not going to be property tax. Of course there is, but the question that they need to ask, what are the actual costs to the families that our community signed an agreement guaranteeing the water to the data center? In communities where data centers have proliferated, electric rates have not just gone up, they have skyrocketed. And no matter how much the legislature says we're going to make sure that we pass that cost on to the corporations that build there, it hasn't happened in other places in the United States. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but they're in, I can get them if you're interested. It's astounding how much the electric rates have gone up. And the same with water. You need to really question, don't rest assured if you live in farm. The local governing units, which are not equipped to make these kinds of high-scale, heavy industrial decisions, they've bamboozled them. And with non-disclosure agreements, we found out through the Data Privacy Act that tract land development coached our planning council in how to deal with the citizenry instead of our mayor has said publicly on a video, if I have a vision for the city and if you don't like my vision, you can just move. That's what we're dealing with. And so when you talk about going to the legislature or becoming an activist about this.
Just quickly, one other thing I wanted to mention is I think there's also a lack of incentives for cities to think in terms of regional demand. Certainly when it comes to groundwater sustainability, but I would imagine, I mean, I'm not an energy expert, but I would imagine that there's other ways that we can shift to more of a regional demand perspective to consider cumulative impact up front when we make these kinds of decisions at the local level within, you know, local units of government that don't have the expertise of the Department of Natural Resources and the, you know, if they're going to get their water through the municipal permit, then that evaluation of aquifer impact might not come until they're quite far into the process of the, you know, project approval.
Water and the people who regulate power could talk to each other. And maybe we could come up with some solutions or at least transparency, because ratepayer protection is important for power, it's important for water, it's important all around, and there's a lot of different legislation that maybe this isn't, I understand the need to focus on data centers, but when you think of it from a systems standpoint, it's like, this is industry. How do we structure this to protect?
I want another hand. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Natalie Stang, his sister. I have a question, actually, more of a challenge, rather, I suppose, for the panel. And I want to start this off by thanking each of you. You all come from diverse and technical backgrounds and really added nuance to the conversation. And I myself, as a bit of a novice, came here today learning quite a bit about the different development aspects of this in particular. So it's not as straightforward as it seems, right? So my question to you guys is, the average American or citizen, or even people that sit on a city council,
and cities manage their water. But I think the simple message is, how much do you have? How much do you need for your people? How much do you have to give away?
That's good. That's really good.
I really love this challenge and question. And I hope this is an iterative process and we can work on it as we, but I think that one of the key questions from MCEA's perspective is the who gets to decide question across, you know, 4 key impacts, which are water, energy, you know, materials. There are a lot of critical materials that are, and e-waste that's created. You know, servers are recycled out, every 3 years. These are massive warehouses full of servers.
I'm coming at this from a consulting firm, which is a small business in Minnesota, and so our tenets are water, ecology, and community. We think of all three. In order to come to these great designs and great solutions, we need to talk to people. People need to talk to people. Humanizing these conversations this is not a 3-sentence thing. I know that's what you, I'm like, oh my God.
You have a linguistics background, I can't imagine.
But I have learned that I need to defend the humanity of everybody involved in this conversation, because this is going to take everybody. This is going to take everybody. Everybody has something to contribute to this. And that's something that I've learned a lot from our environmental planners and how they engage with communities and bring that information to the design table. I didn't even know that was like a thing before I joined DWR. And it's a really beautiful thing, and that we have the people, we have the talent, talk to each other and make those conversations ones where no one loses their humanity in those conversations. And then people aren't scared to share, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I might be able to change my mind. Oh, I know this piece. Did you know this? That's how we can share information and design great solutions.
Need and how much can I give away? I think we just, in our country, it seems like we just forge ahead and look at it only through profit. And we really need to take a look at lifestyle. What are we doing? How is this impacting us in the resources that we have been given? And what am I leaving behind for my grandchildren?
Everybody's already said great things. So mine would be kind of, especially off of Kathy's last point, who benefits? Who's benefiting from this deal most? And in conjunction with who's deciding, how are those things kind of bearing out? Or is it the company who's benefiting? Then, then we might have some problems.
And piggybacking off what you said about thinking about the generations before and who's benefiting, I've really become aware in this energy conversation and now in the water conversation, the indigenous perspective on how to be in the world, on water as a spirit, on designing or moving through the world in a way that will benefit 7 generations forward, 8 generations forward. It doesn't make an easy design challenge, it doesn't make the design easy, but it means you're going into the conversation like Owamni Amni Okodayapi is the organization leading the revitalization of St. Anthony Falls area, the area right near it, 5.2 miles. And let me tell you, we steward this. We are here for but a moment, in geological times especially. Like Minnesota is land, it's where the cloudy sky reflects the water, right? This has been a land where water has been paramount for time immemorial. I mean, these indigenous communities have been here 22,000 years. This isn't even like, I'm not exaggerating. Like, this design challenge, you don't even call it that, but coming to that kind of challenge with that kind of mindset is going to bring solutions that they're not fast, they're not easy, but that's sustainability beyond measure.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Really fantastic.
Yeah, it's similar but much better phrased than my last question was. So I think we're good. Do you want to go to the mic, or otherwise we can also do some individual as we kind of clean up? But go ahead.
My name is Susu Jeffrey, and I'm a member of the Loose Microphone Club. Coalition for a Nuclear-Free Mississippi River. And I do want to say that Minneapolis, which is Dakota for water, not water is life, but water makes life. So dirty water kills life. And I never heard the word cancer spoken tonight, we have a cancer epidemic. 3 years ago, this month, there was a tritium spill out of Monticello. 20 million Americans drink out of the Mississippi with the bald children with the big eyes. Guess who's most susceptible to cancer? Little kids, because they don't come out with any immunities. I mean, it is magical thinking to think that we can have data centers wherever we want and drink clean water. We can't even drink clean water now. What, I mean, who is selling us this ridiculous idea that we can have it all? It's like, oh yeah, we can do that. No, we can't do it. We're not doing it now. Look at the cancer statistics. We have been looking at, I've been writing about it. Every other man is going to get cancer in his lifetime, and 1 out of 3 women. Yes, there's more cancer survival, but at what cost? Come on, folks. I mean, remember when they said, just say no to drugs? Data center is a drug. It's an AI drug. Well, I mean, when I came in here, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to have data centers. Are we really? I mean, this is just such unsophisticated technology, so dangerous, so fire-eating. I mean, isn't there somebody who can do this a little better if you want to have that much electricity?
I do feel a sustainable thing, and there's already talk about the next way to do this, the next better way to do this. So I think the best thing communities can do to protect themselves is have really strong values for what they will accept. If they are considering a data center proposal, make sure you have a really good decommissioning agreement so that in 2 years when it's obsolete, it doesn't just sit there and blight the landscape. I think you haven't heard us talk about the cancer aspect and water quality concerns because we were focused more on quantity, just the sheer quantity of water that's being used. I don't think we understand the discharge from nuclear, at least, nuclear expansion.
And it's 8:30, and we do have to start packing up, but I do think that people can talk individually as we're starting to pack up our stuff so we can leave. And we've kind of touched on a little bit here, but there is so much more to talk and write about. And again, feel free to send something to me at editor@womenspress.com with other ideas and angles so that we can get them in the January issue. But yeah, can you?
Just
A comment, sure.
I got into this, Ben, you work with Ben over at he grew up with my daughter, but that's beside the point. A friend of mine lives in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., where I actually grew up. And it talks about, it's a fact sheet, what the impacts are, what's going on, and then some other options, and also how Virginia's running out of electricity. They're getting it from Maryland, they're getting it from Pennsylvania, and they're talking about building more coal, what are they called? Coal-producing electric plants? Yeah, so anyway, it's a really good site, and it's got really good information, so anyway.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the panel. Also, Kathy, I'm giving you one of our badass tote bags for all the work that you're doing. So thank you all for being here. Again, there's snacks.